No one in medieval Europe lived under feudalism. They couldn't have. The word didn't exist, not in the 11th century, not in the 12th century, and not in the 15th century. Nobody ever swore an oath into a system called feudalism because nobody in the Middle Ages had ever heard of it. The pyramid diagram in your textbook with king at the top and peasant at the bottom, it's not a medieval object. It's a 17th and 18th century one, and historians have spent the last 50 years arguing about whether it should ever be used at all. That argument, though, it's the most useful thing in the whole unit, and almost no Year 8 class ever hears it. Here we go. 10 minutes for us to fix that. The content description is the roles and relationships of different groups in medieval, Renaissance, or pre-modern Europe. Note what it does not say. It does not say feudalism. It does not say the feudal system. It says roles and relationships. Now, look at where that sits in the achievement standard. K02 aligns with the aspect that students are asked to describe the social, religious, cultural, economic, environmental, and political aspects related to changes and continuities. But the same year level carries K06, interpretations about an event, individual, group, institution, or movement, and S07 to explain historical interpretations about significant events, individuals, and groups. Here's the problem. If you teach the feudal pyramid as fact, you have given your students exactly one interpretation and told them that it is the past. They can't explain historical interpretations because you've handed them only one, and you've not told them that it is one. That's not a purist objection. That is an assessment problem. The topic that looks like the safest, most traditional content in Year 8 is quietly the one most likely to underserve S07. So, where does the pyramid actually come from? Well, there's 6 anchor points. The first one, the word is early modern. In the 17th century, the English antiquary Sir Henry Spelman applied the feudal terminology that early modern French legal scholars had formulated to English evidence, and argued that English land tenure belonged to a broader European family of feudal law. It spreads from there. Montesquieu popularizes the idea of a feudal period in 1748. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations in 1776 popularizes the phrases feudal government and the feudal system, and presents feudal government as a stage of social development. So, the model your students are copying into their books was built by Enlightenment writers who were, in large part, using the Middle Ages to attack the French monarchy of their own century. Number 2. Where do the tidy rules come from? Well, largely from Libri Fedorum, the Book of Fiefs, a 12th century legal compilation out of northern Italy. Early modern scholars trace the institution back through documents like that one. That matters, because a law book tells you what the lawyers thought the rules ought to be. It's not a survey of how people actually lived. 3. The pyramid welds together 2 different things. Fief holdings and vassalage describe legal and military obligations between members of a warrior aristocracy. The manor, or the signore, describes how land was worked, what dues were owed, and how the overwhelming agricultural majority actually lived. Those are different arguments with different evidence, and they do not map onto one another neatly. Feudalism, in its strict sense, explains knights. It doesn't explain peasants. If your unit uses the word feudalism to explain village life, you've used the wrong tool, and your students will inherit that error. Number 4, the 3 orders, those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. 2 texts from the 1020s gives us the classic statement, a satirical poem by Bishop Adalbero of Leon addressed to King Robert, and a speech placed in the mouth of Bishop Gerard of Cambrai in History of the Bishops of Cambrai and Arras. 5. And here's the move that changes the lesson. Georges Duby, in 1978, took those 2 texts and argued the 3-order scheme was not a neutral description of society. It was an argument produced by bishops in a political crisis to tell a weakening king what the social order ought to look like. That is a primary source your students can interrogate. It's not a diagram that they simply copy into their book. Number 6, the historiography, and this is the part to teach. Marc Bloch published La Société Féodale in 2 volumes in 1939 and 1940. Bloch treats feudalism broadly as a way of describing an entire society and its social bonds. F.L. Gansoff published Qu'est-ce que le féodalité in 1944. Gansoff defines feudalism narrowly, in legal and military terms, existing only within the nobility. 2 of the field's foundational books, 5 years apart, and they do not mean the same thing by the word. Then, in 1974, Elizabeth A.R. Brown published an article in the American Historical Review called The Tyranny of a Construct. Her argument is that feudalism is a construct that has come to dominate the study of medieval Europe, and that historians relying on this oversimplified model have overlooked evidence that does not fit it. Brown's sharpest observation is about language. She notes that historians reified the abstraction. They write about feudalism as though it would spread like a virus, or waned, or was born or declined, or even died. Open any Year 8 textbook and count how many times feudalism is the subject of a verb it could possibly not perform. 20 years later, in 1994, Susan Reynolds publishes Fiefs and Vassals with Clarendon Press. Reynolds argues that the concepts of the fief and vassalage, as historians understand them, were constructed by post-medieval scholars out of the work of medieval academic lawyers, and that they are a bad guide to the realities of medieval society. Her image is a lens. The model, she argues, distorts more than it clarifies. This isn't settled. There are medievalists who still find the term useful as shorthand, and there are others who still will not use it at all. What is settled is that it is a historian construct and not a medieval one, and your students are entitled to know that. So, student misconception number 1, that the pyramid was a legal structure everybody in Europe lived within. It was not. It wasn't uniform, it was not universal, and arrangements varied enormously by region and by century. Misconception number 2, serfdom and vassalage are the same kind of relationship. A vassal is an elite who holds land in return for service, usually military. A serf is bound to that land and owes labor and dues. Students collapse these two constantly because the pyramid puts them on the same diagram. And the teacher misconception? That because the term is contested, you should avoid it. Do the opposite. The contest is the content. S07 asks students to explain historical interpretations, and here is a live one with names and dates sitting inside the most familiar topic on your unit plan. So here we go. 3 sources, all free, all Australian. 1. The National Library of Australia's digital classroom module, Medium Eveum, the Middle Ages. It's built for Year 8, it maps itself to K01, K02, and K03, and its bound to service topic goes straight at this material. The library states you can download its collection materials for education purposes. The second, also the National Library, the Nankival Calligraphy Collection, roughly 250 manuscripts, fragments, and legal documents, and the Clifford Collection of 10 volumes. Use these for the thing the pyramid can't do. Put an actual land document in front of students and ask what it records. It records a specific grant on a specific term between specific people. It does not record a system. The exact thing the pyramid cannot do. Finally, number 3. Australia holds the 1297 Magna Carta at Parliament House, and the National Library has digitized the Magna Carta so you can put it up on the board in Latin and in translation. For a class in this country, a medieval document about obligations between a king and his lords is at our doorstep. Depending where you live, it might even be just down the road, but it's still pretty cool, and it's not an abstraction. So 2 things you can use on Monday. The distinction to teach explicitly: feudalism is about the elites and land held for service. Minoralism is about how the agricultural majority lived and worked. Make student use the right word for the right group. That single distinction will lift the quality of their writing immediately. And the better inquiry question: not what was the feudal system, but instead, whose idea was the feudal system and what were they arguing for? That question is answerable from Attleborough, from Dubé, and from Brown, and it meets S07 in a way that a pyramid never will. 4 readings. Brown, 1974, in the American Historical Review. Reynolds, Fiefs and Vassals from 1994. Dubé, 3 Orders in 1978. And Gansoff and Bloch, so you can hear the 2 definitions the argument is actually about. That's it. On to the next episode. We move forward into the Renaissance and go after the groups the pyramid leaves out entirely: the towns, the guilds, and the people whose wealth came from the money rather than the land. That is where K02 gets genuinely interesting, and it's where most units stop paying attention.